Welcome to our today's tutorial. In our today's tutorial, we want to look at working with Power BI. Now, this is the Power BI environment. What we want to look at in today's tutorial, we want to look at ETL. In our today's tutorial, we want to look at ETL with Power BI. ETL with Power BI. In one of our previous class, we looked at ETL using Microsoft Excel, working with Microsoft Excel. But in today's environment, today's tutorial, we want to replicate the same thing we did in our previous class, which is ETL with Excel. But today we are looking at ETL with Power BI. Now, if we look at this environment, this is the Power BI environment. This is the Power BI environment. So what do we want? We want to bring in data. We want to bring in data. Where are we bringing in the data from? We have different sources where you can add data to the Power BI environment. One of them is Excel, SQL, and the whole lot of them that we have here. But today, we want to bring in data from Excel. If you look at here, you have what? Get data. Now you have different sources where you can get your data from. Now, when you click on, we want to bring in data from Excel. So what do? Click on Excel. When you click on Excel, we select the source where the data is coming from. We have our data set here, which is the raw sales data from Superstore. Now I'll click on Open. Now when we click on Open, it's now going to load the data to give us a preview of what the data look like in a window. Now here we have one Excel sheet, only one sheet in that very file, and this is a preview of what the data look like. So I can go through the data now and see if this is exactly what I want, and if this is not what I want, there are ways we can remove and add what we want and what we don't want. So now what we want to do here now is the data. If the data here is okay by us, we can load direct to the Power BI environment. But in this case, if you look at something here, this is the order date and this is the ship date. The order date is showing in numbers. The ship date is also showing in numbers. So we have to carry out some transformation to make this, to transform this data into what we want the data to look like. Remember, we are looking at the ETL. That is the extract, transform, and then load. So now we are extracting this data from Excel environment. Now the next thing we want to look at is we want to transform this data. Microsoft Power BI provide an environment for us to transform this data, which is the Power Query environment. So now when we say transform data, it's now going to load the data into the Power Query environment. So now in the Power Query environment, this is the environment where we are now going to transform the data before we move the data to load the data to our Power BI environment. Now, if you follow my previous class, you will understand that this environment here is a familiar environment. This is the same Power Query editor that we used in Excel. So if you are familiar with Power Query editor in Excel, this is also similar to the Power Query editor we used in Excel in our previous class. So what do we want to do here? What do we want to achieve here? If you look at this very order date, is showing in number. This is one of the things we want to take care of. Now what you do is, if you look at there, here we have what? Numbers. So we click on that point there, we change it to date. Now if we say add a new step or replace current step, remember in our previous class we were looking at this very environment where I told us that every step we take in transforming the data, Power Query Editor normally record those steps for us. So we want to replace this current step with what we have done. So we want to do the same thing to this also. Click on date, and I want that to be replaced. Now you can add it as a new step, but I don't want to add too many steps, so I just want to replace that. Now we can go through the data now and see if there is any other area we need to transform. Now let's see if everything is appearing okay for us. Now we look at the sales. Sales is showing in number, I'm okay with that. Quantity is showing in number, I'm okay with that. Then discount is showing in numbers, I'm okay with that. And then we have profit showing in number. So with this now, what we need to do now is to look at the data we want to create. Look at the tables we want to create. How many tables we want to create from this particular data? We can load the data directly as they are now to our Power BI environment, but we want to transform the data. We want to be able to bring out our data model. So how do we do that? I want to duplicate this very table here. I want to duplicate that. I can right click on that and say duplicate. Now this duplicate, what do I want to achieve with this duplicate? I want to bring out the customers. I want to bring out the customers table. So I can rename this now. We can rename this, either right click here and rename, or let's come here and then we want to rename this as customer. So we want to rename this as customers. Now what we want here now is we want only customers columns to appear here. So if you look at this now, from this point down to this point, these are not record relating to customer. So I want to remove this. I can click on remove column, or I can click on remove column. That will remove those columns. I have customer ID, I have customer name, I have the segment the customer belong to. I think these are the things I need for my customers. We don't need any of these other feed columns for my customers, so I'm going to get rid of from country down to the end. So what I will do is I'll hold down my shift key and click on the last column here, and I want to get rid of that. I can right click and say remove column. Now I have these columns, which are the customer ID, the customer name, and then we have the segment that the customer belong to. So what we want to do here is we want to remove duplicate. So I can hold down my shift key and click on this. If I hold down my control key, I will select individual columns like this. But if I want to select everything, I'll click on the first one and then hold down my shift key and click on the last one. That will select all the columns. So how do I remove duplicate rows here? We can remove duplicate rows here by going to remove rows. click on that combo there, we have a remove duplicates. Now when I click on remove duplicate, it automatically remove duplicate based on a duplicate record from this particular table. Now what we have here is, let me take us back once more. I want to use Ctrl Z. Now if you look at the step we took just now, that is this particular step, which is remove duplicate. So if I want to take it back, I can click on this to delete this very step, and that will return the duplicate back. So what do I want to do? There are various ways of removing the duplicate. I want to remove the duplicate based on this customer ID. So if I want to remove the duplicate based on the customer ID, I can click on only that very column, customer ID, click here, and then go to what? Remove duplicate. So when I do that, it removes duplicate from this very record. So what I have here now is only the unique record of the customer. So with this now, I've been able to come up with my customer table. So the next thing we want to look at is, let's look at the read table again here, which is this. So from here now, I want to bring out my product table. So I can still duplicate this very one now, which is the one I want to use for my product table. So let's check now what column here is related to product. What column in this very table is related to product? Now if you look at product, we have product ID here, we have the category of the product, we have the subcategory of the product name. Now these are record relating to our product. These are record relating to our product. So what we want to do now is, from this point, from this sales to the end, this record, we want to get rid of this record. So I can hold down my shift key and click on this. I want to remove these columns. So I right click here and say remove column. Then we have the product name. I need the product name in the product table. So we need from the product table, product ID, the category, the subcategory, and the product name in our table. So what we need now is, what we need to do now is, from this very point, which is the role ID, down to the product ID, we don't need them in our product table. So what we are going to do now is hold down our shift key, click on region here. So from this point down to the first column, we don't need them in our product table. So we right click and then do the same thing to remove those columns. So these are the only columns we need in our product table. So what do? We want to remove duplicates. So we can click on this product ID, then we go to remove rows, and then we say remove duplicate. That will remove all duplicate from the product table. So we now have the unique products that are available. Now this is our product table, so we can go over here again and then rename this as a product. Rename this as a product. So this is our product table. Now after doing that, the next thing we want to look at is, what other table do we need? We need a table for the let's look at table for the regions. Let's look at a table for location. Let's call that location. If you look at the location we have here, we have from country, city, the state, and then we have the postal code. Then we have the region. These are records relating to location. So from product ID down to the ending, I don't need all this. We don't need all this column in our location table. So I'll hold down my shift key and click on this, then I can right click and say remove these columns. Now from the beginning of this that is the first column, down to country are not needed in our location table. So I'll hold down my shift key and then click on segment here, and then we can remove this column. So the columns we need in our location table are country, city, we have a state, we have a postal code, we have a region. So now I want to remove duplicate. Now if we want to remove duplicate, there are some things we need to consider when we are removing duplicate from this particular table. Now what we need to consider here is, are we going to use this as our product key? As our primary key. One thing we need to look at is, if we are using this very postal code as our primary key, we are going to run into some problem, in the sense that if more than 2 cities are using the same postal code, then of course we are going to run into problem. But for state, or let's say state can use, maybe there are states that are having the duplicate, the same postal code, or there are. So what we need to do now is, we need to be very sure that more than one city is not using the same postal code. So to do that, to be on the safer side, I will prefer to use city. I would prefer to use city, to drill it down to city, because state, there are many cities in that very state, in each state. Region, we have just about 3 to 4 regions. Then so the lowest area where we can drill it down to is the city. So now we'll use city. Let's remove duplicate based on the cities. So I'll click on that, remove duplicate. So now we have the cities, but another thing we can do here is, do we use the city as our primary key feed? Now we can introduce a primary key feed, which is going to be a unique identifier. I want to bring my city close to this very place. I'll drag it just to change the position here. So here we want to add a column, and the column we want to add a column that is going to be our unique identifier, because we may run into a situation where more than one city is using the same postal code. So to do that, to add a unique column to that, we can go to add column. When we go to add column, we have different method of adding column. We have column from example, add column from example, then custom column. We have invoke functions, and then we have conditional column, we have a index column, and we have a duplicate column. But in this case, we are going to talk about each of this one in subsequent video, but here we will just want to look at indents. So when we click on indents here, you find out that we have indents column here. So I want to add indents column from 0 or from 1. In this case, let me add indents column from 1. So it's not going to add an indents column for me, and that is from 1 down to the last number, which is a unique identifier. So I will move this now to, I will prefer it to be at the beginning of this table. So this is our location ID. Now we can rename this as location ID. So all you need to do is right click on that, and then you say rename. And what do we want to call this? We want to call this our location ID. Let's just call it location ID. Let's just do this location ID. Location ID. So this is showing as number. I don't want it to be number. Okay, yes, I'll prefer it to be number. This is number. So we are done with the table, and this table we are working on is our location table. So I'm going to call this, we are going to rename this location. So now we have the location table, we have the customer table, we have the product table. The next table we want to look at is the order table. The order table. Now, when we look at the order table, I'm going to duplicate this very one also. I'm still going to duplicate this very one. Now, when we want to duplicate this very one, we right click on that and we say what? Duplicate. So now we are going to duplicate this very one again. That is the one we are going to use for the order. Our order. This is going to be our FAT table. This is going to be our FAT table. Now, when we look at this table, we have a unique role here, which is the role ID here. We have the order ID and we have the date and the rest. So, but what we want to look at now is we want to remove the columns that are not needed in this very table. The columns that are not needed in this very table. So now, let's work on this table. Let's clean up this table. You find out that we have the order ID, we have the role ID. The role ID is going to uniquely identify all the records that are in this table. We have the order ID, we have the date ID and the shipping ID, the shipping date. We have the shipping mode, and all these ones are needed here. The customer ID. So we already have a customer ID which is going to uniquely identify the customer. So we don't need the customer name and we don't need the customer segment. So we can get rid of this by removing these columns. Country, we don't need the country here because we are going to have a location ID that is going to do that for us. So the city, let's keep the city. We can remove the state. We can remove the state, postal code, region. We don't need these ones, so we can get rid of these ones. We can remove them from the table. Now we have product ID, and with product ID here we don't need the category to be here. We don't need the subcategory to be here. We don't need the name of the product to be here because the product ID is already taking care of these columns. Now the rest thing we have is sales, quantity, the discount and profit. So these are the things we need in our FAT table. These are the record we need in the FAT table. So this table now we are going to call this, let's call this our order, or let's call this our FAT sales table. Let me call this our FAT. Let's just make it simple. We call it, let's call it our sales table. Let's call this our sales table. Now we now have the location table which uniquely identify the various locations. We have the customer table we have the product table, and we have this sales table. Now, after having all of this, this very table here, we can get rid of this very table, except if we want to create more tables from this. But if we don't want to create more tables from this, we can get rid of this table. Now, other table that we can create from this is the calendar table. But in this very class, I'm not going into the calendar table from here. So I'm going to get rid of this very one. I will delete this very table because I don't need it right now in the Power Query Editor. So this is what we have here. We have all the record, all the tables we need. So what we need now is we can now load this record into our Power BI environment. So we can now load this record into our Power BI environment. So how do we load this record to our Power BI environment? If you look at this button here, we have close and apply. We have apply. So what I want to do is we want to close and apply. So click on close and apply. That will move the record from the Power Query Editor to the Power BI environment. So what you can see here now is the loading of the record. Remember, we are talking about our ETL, which is what? Extract. We extracted the record from Excel environment, then we transform the data using our Power Query Editor. So now we are loading the data into our Power BI environment. So you can see now that the data have been loaded to our Power BI environment. So if you look at data here in Power BI environment, we have the customer table. When you click on that, you see all the columns that are there in the customer table. Then we have the location table. You have all the feed that are all the columns that are there in the location table, and we have the product table, and also we have the sales table. So this is how we can extract, transform, and load data. Now the other area I want us to look at is this data we have here. We may have data coming from different sources. Let's say our sales data are coming from the internet source. Our product data, let's say we have them in SQL environment. Location, let's say we have them in text file. Customer table, let's say we have them in Excel. So we can really bring in data from various environments. Power BI supports all these various environments. So we can extract this data from various environments into the Power Query Editor, clean them up in the Power Query Editor, that is transform them, and then we can now load them. Being able to get one or two things from this video, just do me a favor, click on the like button and click on the subscribe button so that you will not miss out in our subsequent video. Thank you very much.